Oh, and I see one of my students here,
Great.
Sierra.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Hi.
Great. Well, welcome everybody who's joined us so far. All humanists, atheists, free thinkers, and other skeptics and critical thinkers. This is Greater Boston Humanist Carl Sagan Day talk. And Carl Sagan Day has been recognized by many secular groups as a day to celebrate science education in the vein of the late educator's lifetime of work, helping explain the cosmos and our place in it to hundreds of millions of us humans. And even to any beings out there who may find our feeble first attempt to send a record of Earth's life on Voyagers 1 and 2. Carl Sagan's birthday is November 9. So we're celebrating a little early because our events are usually Sundays. About every month we have a talk, and they're usually Sundays at 1:30 p.m. So you're welcome to check our ongoing calendar at bostonhumanists.org to see all local activities that we help. And obviously we have somebody else trying to get on.
Fuck you. Your fucking meeting, bitch.
Wow.
Fuck.
So, it's bizarre that we are having so many issues lately, but I think we're on people's radar after our last talk about talking science to science deniers. So I'll do my best to fight back anybody who tries to burst in here. I'm not sure I think I can mute everybody at once. Yeah, so I'll try that one time. That may mute the speaker. So anyway, our thanks to Joe Gerstein and Smart Recovery, an alternative addiction treatment program based on science, for letting us use their Zoom account for our meetings during the pandemic. Boston Humanists were active in founding and promoting Smart Recovery since the 1990s. Now I'd like to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land where we work, live, learn, and build community has been a place where people have lived for over 13,000 years. This land is the territory of the Massachusetts, Pawtucket, and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples. We wish to respect the continued connections with past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples in the greater Boston area community. We would also like to invite all to get involved in anti-colonialist and Indigenous land struggles wherever you live. Our Carl Sagan speaker today, Professor David Orenstein, teaches at City University of New York, Medgar Evers College. He trained as a primatologist, teaches anthropology, and currently serves as the American Humanist Association's representative to the United Nations through the DPI NGO program. An activist in several non-belief organizations, he has also co-authored the book Godless Grace: How Non-Believers Are Making the World Safer, Richer, and Kinder, as well as Darwin's Apostles. So as a big fan of much science fiction and of Carl Sagan, I welcome you to Greater Boston Humanists.
Thank you, Stuart, very, very much. And I want to thank everybody who is attending this afternoon's program, including the Zoom bombers. Maybe if they lower their volume, they'll learn something, which would be nice to share. But regardless of that, or irrespective of that, this is one of my favorite topics. So I thank you for reaching out via, I think it was Facebook originally, asking if I would be interested in doing this talk, which I've done previously, but it's not one of my, usually I'm on the Darwin circuit, but this topic is really fascinating to me. In fact, I'm thinking about writing a book on this topic from the anthropological perspective. I appreciate you and the Greater Boston Humanists and everybody on the Zoom program today for coming and talking, because, it's such a speculative area. And I see from several of your backgrounds that I already have people who are interested in the science of this, and maybe even the science fiction of the issue of, are we not alone? And that's something that, we'll get into when we start the program. But I do appreciate everyone's attendance, and we'll make this hopefully a fun and instructive 90 minutes.
Thanks.
Sure.
So
Shall I start?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Here. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Okay. You all can see this? Hopefully, yes. Okay. We'll start by really looking at this topic from not only just a secular humanist or a science point of view, but even from the fact that this is the issue of, are we alone in the national consciousness? We've know for quite some time that the military has been involved, and thus the military and our government has been involved in looking at the issues related to, are we alone, or what's happening with these flybys, and what is it that these ships are that may or may not be the equivalent of Zoom bombing these Air Force or airplanes. And so this is in the national consciousness. Are we alone? And are we alone in the cosmos? Certainly, it looks like in our own solar system, we might be the top of the food chain, but that doesn't necessarily mean we are for the entire cosmos and within the galaxy. Bill Nelson, who is the current administrator of NASA, who was in government, he was a senator and congressman, just came out in late October. It made the news as the current NASA administrator, saying, well, I don't have the evidence yet to suggest that we are being visited by aliens or beings from another planet, but wink, wink, we probably are, and that we're not alone. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if the head of NASA comes out and talks about this so openly, the data may already be out there. The question is how and who is sharing it. And there are a lot of issues with that, of course. But it's clear that at the highest levels of our government, the idea of questioning whether or not we are alone in the universe, and what that means can be as simple as radio signals being bounced from our planet out into the solar system and getting a signal back. It doesn't necessarily have to be little green men or something coming from another planet to prove or suggest beyond a reasonable doubt from the scientific point of view that we are not alone. And so we have to always reframe when we're talking about, well, who is visiting us? The question is, well, how and by what mode would humans make first contact? It may not be physical contact. Since this is Carl Sagan Day, you probably or may have seen this in your own studying of Carl or of the information. Here's a guy who basically, said that he had been fascinated by this topic for his entire life, and that his support of SETI goes back to his earliest advocacy as an astronomer. Because he understood the importance of how groundbreaking it would be to understand that we are not alone in our galaxy and within our universe. But as he carefully said, is that if we tread going forward, we have to do so with reason, beyond a reasonable doubt, and with information. In other words, we can't hope this is true. We have to have physical, material evidence for our justifications. In other words, it can't just be an hypothesis. It has to be the theory. It has to be proven. There has to be some evidence. And so to back up this rather fascinating, rigorous statement, you could sum up Carl Sagan's feelings on this topic in just a few words, where he said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so we would need that extraordinary evidence in order to be able to say beyond a shadow of a doubt that not only are we being visited by creatures, either directly or through their technology, but that information needs to be managed in some way, scientifically tested, so we can prove that this is happening. When we talk about first contact from the anthropological point of view, though, what we're really talking about is when two communities meet that have been separate for their entire existence. That is, there is the time of no contact and then a time of contact. And that happens in our own species history for the last 150,000 years. Since we left Africa, we have been contacting each other for greater and lesser reasons, some rather disastrous, some rather beneficial. But contact has been happening between humans for quite some time. When we left Africa and populated the planet, there weren't a lot of us. But when we left and started to populate these geographic areas in Europe and Asia and the Americas, you constantly have this contact, drop contact, new contact with all of its different reasons. Could be trade, could be war, could be evangelicalism, a million different reasons why people have contacted and lost contact. And we know that we've even had contact with other species other than our own. Here's an example of in northern Iraq, a Neanderthal who was ceremonially buried. And we know the story of the Neanderthals, although we do in certain human populations have DNA from Neanderthal stock that humans contacted Neanderthals, inbred with them in certain groups, but also outcompeted them until Neanderthals themselves became extinct. So the history of contact on this planet has been Homo sapien sapien focused. And it's clear that while Neanderthals maybe couldn't have existed, they were maybe built for a different weather condition, and they might not have had the same frontal lobe as anatomically modern humans have in terms of being able to think in greater ways, or domesticate and so on and so forth. They did have art, they did have culture, but come the pressure of contact with anatomically modern humans, that was the writing on the wall for Neanderthals. So again, contact is not always favorable. And we have to think about that even when we think about contact with alien civilizations that may come to rest on the planet Earth. You know, how will they see us? And we'll get more into that. And then, of course, over the last 400 or 600 years or so, we know what contact has been like in with European oppression and colonialism. Stuart, your statement at the beginning of the program related to acknowledging the history of people who came before us is very, very important. Because it's very easily wiped out from not only our history, but our consciousness. And we know that during times of European contact, that other cultures suffered greatly. There was loss of land, loss of culture, most importantly, loss of people. Either they died or were in some cases enslaved. And so contact can have a very dirty meaning when we talk about human to human contact. Not always. Certainly in the case of the internet, we make an awful lot more contact, if you will, in between us now. And Zoom bombers aside, it has made the planet a little more habitable, I believe. You know, minus out the fact that there's all these conspiracy theorists online and all these other things. But we are a social species, right? I mean, from the primatologist point of view, humans are imitative and we are social. We need to be together. We need to make this contact. So here we are now in the early stages of being, you know, figuring out how to leave the planet, which we've only really done in the last 60 or 70 years. We didn't even figure out, you know, E equals MC square, right? 120 years ago, maybe. So we're really in our own infancy when it comes to exploring and understanding what could possibly be out there in the universe. We've made some great strides when you think about the evolution of humans from 300,000 years ago, the first evidence of us, to 150,000 years ago to leaving Africa, to only about 12,000 years ago, starting to stratify and live in organized communities larger than band or tribal life, and then the explosion of technology. So the next logical step, as Carl Sagan said, was to, once we've explored this planet, is to sort of move us off into other worlds. So we know that there's a deep recorded history between contact of humans and other humans, as suggested by the previous slides. We know that there are many things that affect contact: immigration, migration, natural disaster, global communication, war, imperialism. And all of these factors could come back because we don't know the whole story of the universe, what might be happening on a more galactic scale. That is, perhaps these same issues are fundamentally happening outside our own planet and our own understanding of the nature of the cosmos. We also know that there have been winners and losers when people make contact with other people. So we could, in effect, become the really big winners, the lottery winners of contact, but we could also be on the negative side of that as well. You know, this is very speculative because it depends on who we make contact with, and if that is just radio signals or some type of code, or whether it's physical contact, and how immediate that is. And we know today that humans are still humans, that there are aggressive and politically and economically threatening groups of people that are on the national stage that threaten the cultural sovereignty of others. And it doesn't even have to be on the national stage. We know that there are people in our own communities that threaten the cultural sovereignty of other people. So this is the human experience, and it is the construct in which we find ourselves. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be, that those who might come will have the same experience or interest or disinterest with other humans. So for the longest time, we've been looking at, I think since as long as humans have been humans, the question of, is there something bigger than us? And, religion tends to try to answer that, and we know the stories of various Bibles and religious faiths that say that we're, made in a deity's image, and that the world was created, or the universe was created in 6 days, and that there are constraints to that, because if some people, of course, believe that the world is 6,000 years old, although the evidence is that the world is, 4.5 billion years old, and that the universe itself is 14 billion years old. We know that there are other forms of spirituality and philosophy that also attempt to answer these questions, maybe outside of theology. That is, why are we here? Are we some part of something bigger? But what I trust in is not necessarily the theology, which I respect people who, as an anthropologist and as a humanist, if they, regardless of their particular beliefs are. But for me, it is science, which remains the most available and plausible construct to offer the most rational and material explanation of whether or not we are part of something bigger. We know that we are one human species because science shows us that we have the evidence of this, right? We have our DNA, which shows that we are part of something bigger. We have the fossil evidence, which shows the history of humans evolving, going back to antecedent species, going back 6 million years. And we know, as Neil deGrasse Tyson likes to say, we are connected biologically to each other, chemically to the earth, and since we're all made of star stuff, to the universe. So that, to me, because we have the physical rather than philosophical evidence, proves to me that we are part of something bigger. And so when we look at that, we realize that in most cases that all explanations can't necessarily, not all explanations can be true. That is, that the less rational, the more opinionated, and the more biased, and the ones that lack evidence are least likely to field good results and true understanding of our own human existence and our place in the cosmos. So we've seen through generations trying to use their biases and their faulty imaginations to prove that humans are closest to God and the top of the food chain. And because of that, we don't need to worry about the environment. We don't need to worry about anything else because we'll make it through, because our particular deity promised us that we would never scour he or she or it would never scour the world again. Although we know that the science of climate change shows us that we are our own worst enemy and that we are destroying the planet at a rate which is disturbing. We also know that there are other things that can limit our curiosity because of where and who we are born to. That has nothing to do with race or ethnicity, but it can do to issues related to access to education, what time frame you're born into. You know, if we used an iPhone in 1920 or 1720, we probably would be witches. But because we're using this technology now, we just assume that it's normal. We've normalized an awful lot of technology. But we can be limited by authority, right? Governments could stop people from talking, can stop people from communicating, and can push lines of ideas which may be subjective and might be pseudoscientific, but don't have any real factual basis. Flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, and the list goes on and on and on. So to me, the bigger questions when they're asked, especially about the physical cosmos, really look at the best way they can be answered is through looking at facts. That is, using the idea and the systems of peer review, getting other disciplines involved in how we make decisions on what is truth. And then the beauty of it is where in some cases, the fallacy is the line can never be changed because some authority has said, no, this is the way it is. The thing about science, which some people criticize who don't understand science, is that science is changing as more evidence is made, it's clear. So that's really, really important to understand that our material knowledge grows, our understanding grows as the tools in our human toolbox to understand things grows. And case in point, the Drake equation, which is a great way of thinking about, are we alone in the universe? You know, depending on what number you put in to start with, and in technology, it's always garbage in, garbage out, right? But depending on, you know, if you use a rational number of 100 million as your n versus 200 billion, well, what you get at the end is a smaller subset of information, but it still says the same essential things, whether we are littered with possible species of alien life in the cosmos, or whether that number is really, really small. What the Drake equation allows us to understand is that going through these steps is three fundamental things. The fact is, whether the n resolves in 1 billion civilizations or 200 trillion civilizations, that ultimately the answer is that we're not at the top of the food chain, that humans are not alone, regardless of what you start with in terms of the n. And that the universe is alive with species that could be traveling long distances over short periods of space-time. And finally, I think the ultimate implication, perhaps not in our lifetimes, perhaps yes, is that eventually we will meet another spacefaring civilization. Now, we have to put this also into the context of how incredibly large the cosmos really is, right? We know some facts, right? Going back to the science, that light travels at 186 miles per second. Using our own systems and propulsion, it takes us 9 months to reach Mars. A light year is 6 trillion miles. if we could travel at the speed of light, it would only take us to get to the nearest star to our own would take 4 light years. So it would be an 8.5 light year round trip if we could travel at the speed of light to Proxima Centauri. Except we can't do that now. And based on the number of light years, it would take 81,000 years to reach Proxima Centauri. Think about how time itself, in terms of time, space-time itself, can be so oppressive to the human spirit. Except we also know that we are really good at figuring things out and building on the betterment and also the mistakes of others. If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't be going to Mars right now. We wouldn't have sent Voyager spacecrafts outside of the solar system. So then, there are 100 billion galaxies estimated in the universe. The Milky Way galaxy, its own, is 100,000 light years wide. It's 588 quadrillion miles. Think about the cost of your Uber. If you had to go across the galaxy, you better have a credit card that can cover you for that. So there's the amount of space and time that is out there is just mind-boggling, based on our own rather sad but rather current ability to to still be constricted by our inabilities to go faster and faster, and to have ships that can actually survive and move us forward. Other civilizations, other spacefaring civilizations, may have conquered the light year. We haven't. So the question is, how did they get here? Well, there are a couple of things, if we're talking about the material nature of the cosmos, that we have to remember. That the universe is made up of the same physical, chemical, and biological laws that are found on Earth. They would be true in the cosmos. We have to go by that assumption. That is, that we understand chemistry, we understand physics, we understand biology, and that those things still are true whether we're here or a billion light years away. It doesn't mean that creatures that come and visit us are going to look like us. What I mean by biological laws in particular is that natural selection plays out whether you're on Earth or whether you are on a planetary system near Alpha Centauri. So spacefarers, if they're going to be visiting us, and it's not just a radio signal, but physically visiting us, would have to have mastered things that we have not been able to master yet. So they could be perhaps multi-dimensional beings. We exist in 3 dimensions. We perhaps know about 4 dimensions or understand the physics of 6-dimensional space. But just as a 2-dimensional being could not understand what it's like to live in 3 dimensions, we as 3-dimensional beings could not even imagine what it is to be able to harness or live in 16 dimensions. And if one of those dimensions are the time-space continuum, then going between past and future, those categories may not even exist for a multi-dimensional being. If they're not multi-dimensional, then they're really good engineers, because it means that they've been able to exploit space-time in a way that bends physics. Doesn't necessarily break physics, but bends physics. So they can use the synchronicity, they can use a wave or a field, and they can exploit space-time using a wormhole. I'm not sure, but that they can do this in some way where, again, past, present, future, distance become irrelevant. And because, maybe not so much in the case of multidimensional beings, but certainly in terms of beings that can exploit the synchronicity, they would have to be master inventors. Engineering techniques that we have not uncovered yet. Metals or compounds that do not exist on Earth, or we have not been able to forge them chemically. Propulsion system in fuels that we are ignorant of have been mastered by the beings that come and visit us. So the question comes, if it's not a radio signal, right, and we are visited by an alien civilization, who might possibly come? And as the anthropologist in me suggests, that we're really talking about three different types of people. Or let's not say people, let's say beings. Okay, and they fall into three sort of gross categories. The takers, the anthropologists, my own bias, and the givers. And each of these have different outcomes related to what happens to humans biologically, culturally, linguistically, and to our science. First of all, if the takers come, they're the imperialists. You know, they're driven by their own cultural and physical needs, by their own economic needs, by their feelings of supremacy. And where have we seen this, but not in our own contact with other humans? And their motives will be, just as the motives have been with white European colonialism, to capitalize on our inability to fight back, or because we have the lack of technology or preparedness. We may face mass extinction and genocide if the takers come. We will possibly be enslaved because there's evidence for this in our own experiences. Or we could be used for food, or we could be used for entertainment. The Colosseum, divide and conquer. And essentially, if these beings have any interest in the earth outside of us, which is to get rid of us, if they need anything from the earth, which maybe, or maybe they don't, or maybe it's just their way of having fun, they will deplete and destroy the earth's resources for their need or pleasure. Essentially, this is the Stephen Hawking view of contact. Stephen Hawking has come off, quoted many times saying that, you know, it would be the equivalent of stepping on an anthill. If a civilization that was so advanced could travel interstellar space, there would be no reason for them to see us as nothing other than inferior beings with very or little value. And we've seen this in our fiction. I know you have the United Federation of Planets behind you, right? The Borg, Independence Day. We've already thought about this culturally as humans, right? Because we find it in our entertainment, right? Terminators, Alien, Predators, War of the Worlds. One of my favorite, of course, is the episode of The Twilight Zone, To Serve Man, right? So this may seem like crazy, but it's not new because we've already sort of gotten there. And also, if you've seen the film, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the bureaucrats. We're going to destroy the earth because we got to put this hyperspace byway through it And that's the way byways are, and that's what we have to do. You know, no interest in human civilization at all. The next group, as I like to call them, the anthropologists, are the non-disruptors. So these are the groups that really follow the anthropological view of doing no harm. They may observe us, but they may not make direct contact with us. The idea is to have a non-intervention directive, sort of like Starfleet Academy, right? So we would be, we could call this the anthropologists, or we can call it the librarians. We will be observed, we will be cataloged, we will be categorized, but there won't be specific intentional contact. And the thing is, and again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but they may already be ignoring and avoiding us right now. That is, if they're out there and the plan is to just watch to see what happens, maybe there are some breadcrumbs left over, and we have this idea of, oh, look, we saw this ship pass by an airline, or, you know, we took these photographs, but they're not making contact. They're just observing. So this is the group of species that may value cultural self-determination. And for us, that might be eventually getting past our infancy, our petty hatreds, our inability to see each other as one common species, and hopefully also avoiding the idea of self-annihilation. So these species would have the tools to be able to change our world and the technology, but they would not be used openly. Now, there are cases where anthropologists go visit native tribes and they leave something behind, and next thing you know, you've changed the culture of the tribe, because the fact that you made contact just changes the nature of the human experience for the group. And essentially, this is the Gene Roddenberry and Franz Boas, who's the father of American anthropology, view of what contact would look like. And again, where have we seen this? You know, Starfleet, E.T., Paul, if you've seen that film. Again, The Hitchhiker's Guide with Ford Perfect, and perhaps our future selves. You know, the idea is that we might be able to visit ourselves, but we can't contact ourselves, simply because if we do, we might change the nature of the future. It's that conundrum where if we break the circle, we may have stopped the future from happening, but future selves may come back if we can be multidimensional beings, or harness the synchronicity in some way to observe what's happening on the planet. We've seen this with the film, The Three Monkeys, right? Was that it? The Three Monkeys with Brad Pitt and the guy from Die Hard. I can't remember his name, the actor. But anyway, so this is happening. The last group, and this is the group that I think Carl Sagan really thought about when he wrote the film Contact. And he always believed this outside of the fiction, was that the group that would come and make contact with us would be a group that would be partners with our common humanity. They would have almost a parochial or a teacher point of view. They would want to actively improve life on Earth, share tools and technologies outside of what we currently have. Are there a lot of stripes on my face right now? Yes. Don't worry, I'm not going into another dimension. It's just the way the sun is shining. So the idea is the givers are the ones who are here to make the world a better place, for us to perhaps enjoin an understanding that we are not alone in the cosmos. That is, if sort of taking the opposite view of Stephen Hawking by saying that if they've made it, and going back to the Drake equation, right, that there are certain societies out there that may come back and say, well, let's help these people out because they are worthy of our time and attention now. The other thing, and we'll talk about this a little later, is that, you know, any of these groups, maybe not the givers, maybe not the takers, but the other two may not feel that we're worthy yet for contact. So again, this is the point of view of Carl Sagan. And we see this in the film Contact. If you've ever seen the movie Arrival, you get the same essence. The alien and robot from the Earth, day the Earth stood still, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And again, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Let me see if I move a little bit, if that's a little better or worse, I'm not sure. With the planet builders returning the Earth to its best version of itself. And how do we communicate? You know, just like there are some 2,000 dialects and languages on this planet, we cannot assume that any creature, if it is evolved outside of the planet Earth, will have a syntax and an ability to communicate the way we do with words and sounds. You know, you might all be understanding that what I'm saying simply because these sounds that I'm making sound like English, and you learned at a really young age to speak and understand what I'm saying. Okay. But here's the deal. With takers, there won't be a conversation. It will be one way from them. Here I am, F you, you're all nothing to me. Okay. With the anthropologists, it would probably be the other way around. It would be one way from us because they would not seek direct communication. So they would already know how we communicate, whether it be through radio signals, whether it be through writing, you know, like the Voyager spacecraft, whether it be through some type of symbolic language, whether it be through sound, whether it be through kinesthetics, all these different ways that humans learn to learn and communicate what's going on and to be able to communicate. The anthropologists would already know that, and would have been cataloged. With the givers, it would probably be two-way conversations, but we would probably need to learn, even if we spoke the same language, and that language may or may not be math or the language of science, we would still need to have a primer in order to understand their version of the mathematics that we hold as understandable and sustainable. But once we get there, and if we're taught this, then we can have that two-way communication. So 5 things to be understanding about this. Contact would prove that there's intelligent life out there in the cosmos and that it is abundant. Right now, we can't say one way or the other whether or not it is. It would certainly show that we are in no way the top of any philosophical or biological food chain. If it's the anthropologist by accident or the givers by intention, we will have a greater understanding of the natural sciences and physics and engineering. we will certainly learn from and understand the universe much bigger. Even if it's the takers, these things still hold true. We sure as heck will know we're not the top of the biological food chain because we may become part of the food chain for somebody else. And ultimately, in terms of culture, it would change our species depending on how we cooperate or fight off either of these groups, depending on what their intentions and motivations are. So subject to their intentions and motivations, then we have to act. And that is ultimately the form of contact that has been going on this planet for 150,000 years. So a couple of other quick things, and then we'll go into some of the other anthropological areas. What happens to our culture? If it's the takers, it doesn't matter. If it's the givers, chances are we will culturally appropriate their views. Because we are an imitative species, because we are a social species, we will learn to grow and we will begin to accept their dominant culture because it would be a dominant culture. We could thrive technologically. In the short term, it could be the war. People will have what I like to call the war of the worlds moment. You know, back when Orson Welles had that radio program in the 1930s, I think it was, he scared the populations of New Jersey and a lot of the world that received the broadcast because we thought we were under attack, and people committed suicide, committed horrible acts, were incredibly fearful because they didn't know that, you know, if they tuned in after they made the announcement, the PSA, that, oh, this is just a dramatization, people really thought that we were under attack by Martians. And so people could have the world, a war of the worlds view of this. Certainly if we're attacked by the takers, but even if we're contacted by the other two groups, that fear will be the driver for large parts of our humanity. Fear of the unknown, fear of the fact that we are not the top of the biological food chain. In the far term, though, wouldn't it be fascinating to see what happens culturally when we don't see ourselves as national citizens anymore, but as a global citizenship or a cosmological citizenship? That is one of the possible outcomes once we get past, for some, which would be the war of the worlds moment. And humans would still be humans, by the way. Even if we make contact, there are going to be people who are going to use this politically, positive or negative, whether it's a radio signal or someone lands, you know, in the mall on Washington, D.C. and says, hi, guys, here's all this great stuff. There's going to be competition. There's going to be competition for news, for identity, for what this means for our common humanity. So there will be, people will still take sides. There will be politicians. There will be issues related to stratification, you know, in the short term, maybe even in the near term. But these things will still play a role until we figure out how to get past those things. And there are a lot of other what ifs. You know, for some people, this contact might make them rethink their theology, and these beings would become gods. And why do I say this? Well, because an anthropologist and as a historian, we know that this has happened. right? If you've seen the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy, or cargo cults, if you don't know what those are. In the 1940s, the B-52s were flying over certain uncontacted areas, dropping food and supplies, and the tribes that found them made gods out of the airplanes. So that is a real possibility that this is out here. And again, I put this under the category of what if, simply because it's still so speculative. And I'll bring up Neil deGrasse Tyson as well, because, there's a lot of interesting stuff about there about, oh, we're so, and it's true from an evolutionary point of view, we're really close to our chimpanzee cousins. Think of the difference, there's only about 1.3% difference between a bonobo chimpanzee and humans. Well, yeah, but look what that 1.3% has meant. The difference between putting a stick in an ant mold and pulling out some ants and eating it, and maybe cupping some water, to, at this point in our evolution, going off the planet and searching the cosmos for extraterrestrial life. I don't even want to say intelligent life, because intelligence is so subjective, but extraterrestrial life. Going down the food chain, there's only about 4% difference between baboons and humans. 90%, we have a 90% genetic connection with spider monkeys. Now, what happens when these beings come, these extraterrestrials come, right? What if they are 1.2% smarter than us? Will we be seen as the bonobos? What if there's a 4% difference in our DNA, even though we don't share the same, we won't share the same DNA because they're not from the same planet, right? Would we be considered the baboons? What if these creatures aren't even carbon-based? We assume that they'll sort of in some way look like us, but what if they're silica, right? It's a possibility. The chemistry of silicate is out there. What if they're gaseous, or have evolved to be gaseous and not even have a form? How will we relate to these beings? What happens if, even if our language, even if our mathematics is so incoherent that we sound like nothing more than flies buzzing? Or perhaps we're just not worthy. The reason why we haven't made direct contact yet is because those who would want to don't think we're ready. And that doesn't mean that we're not preparing, right? There's something called the cold scale, which deals with communication and the level of discourse that NASA is working on right now. In fact, it was just in the news, 7 points, which is why, going back to Bill Nelson's discussion, there's a paper that just came out using this thing from NASA called the cold scale of how we should assess and communicate once we make contact with beings from another planet or another solar system or another region of space, and how we might react to it. And then, of course, there are other scales, even going back to the 1960s, the Kardashev scale about alien civilization. So as I like to teach my students, there are 3 areas of anthropology that sort of fit across everything that impacts this planet. And it's talked about a great deal by Charles Darwin, related to adaptation, speciation, and extinction. Basically, everything that fits into our knowledge base, culturally, biologically, relates in some way to adaptation, speciation, and extinction. They are distinct operations, and they lead to different impacts in culture, in our physical sense, in our language. And the best way to show it is to show it as a descriptive set of trees, that everything is interconnected and everything is related, and you can see growth, and you can see death, and you can see change. So culture is a living organism. Biology obviously is, as is language. And each of these organisms can adapt, can speciate, that is, change into other animals or beings or things or languages, or they can go extinct. And when we talk about cultural adaptation, we're really talking about the idea in terms of contact is when groups of people come together and they share their ideas and their philosophies and they mix, right? Where in the United States, for instance, we might be, some variety of blank American, but there is an American identity and culture, as there is an ethnic American identity and culture. And these adaptations are always happening. It's very amorphous, but that the culture itself remains pretty much the same, although it gets pulled like taffy in many, many different directions. With cultural speciation, you have distinct breaking between groups of people, right? And we know from our politics, if you look at East and West Germany, or North and South Korea, or Catholics and Protestants in Ireland during their civil war, that you had people who lived in the same areas, but they thought, they spoke, and they acted in different ways. And that's basically, so even if you're on the same land mass or the same national country, if you will, you can have a speciation between groups of people. And the last thing, of course, is extinction. That is, culture overtakes or diminishes another culture or group to the point where that culture can no longer exist and it disappears. Right? So the phenomenon of the heritage American, which is a form of speciation, right? Jewish American, Italian American, Irish American, African American, right? That's heritage American, right? That same thing will happen if we make contact with extraterrestrial beings. I can almost guarantee you from a heritage point of view, if not only as well from a national point of view, people will look at these beings and try to form some type of ethnic connection as well. Because we do this all the time. We want to seem like others. We want others to understand and see us, acknowledge us. Cultural extinction, well, here you have it. Cultures that have gone extinct or are near extinct across pretty much every region of the planet. Okay. So here you have issues of cultural appropriation, right? Here you have adaptation, whether it be art for the sake of fashion. Here you have in terms of colonialism, taking somebody out of their dress and putting them in European clothing, and over to what is my right, a native person who came into contact with the West and still practices their culture, but now dresses very different from what they historically dressed like. I can almost guarantee you, speaking as someone who studies this stuff and who is an anthropologist, this will be our reaction to making first contact. Because we've seen it. Cosplay. We are already there in our imaginations. We have adapted and adopted cultural ideas from our own fiction and turned it into what we can digest and realize. And it's the same thing with linguistic adaptation. That is, groups come together, words may change or interchange. A speciation is where languages split. When extinction is almost the same as cultural extinction, and I'll show you that, right? But here in the lexicon, which is essentially the dictionary of a culture's language, right? Look at the generational words on the screen right now, right? How many of you know the word dead ass and what that means? My students taught me that one, right? But think about this: bro, iPhone, URL, writer, freedom, fix. These have multiple meanings: BFF, beatbox, and so on and so forth. And I challenge my students all the time, if this was 1972 and I write something like, Google my website from your iPhone, well, in 1972, that would sound like gibberish, wouldn't it? But you all know exactly what I said now. So time and context is really, really important when we talk about linguistics. We have to have a sender and receiver that understands the nature of the language in order for us to understand what it is that we're trying to get across. Here are words that are not English per se, but are part of the lexicon of English today. And cultural speciation is where we have Black vernacular English, Spanglish, Creole. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, where you have a master or gross language, and then you have different ethnic groups breaking off or taking from it nativist language and turning it into something else, which is different than dialect, right? But it's when we're talking about meaning, right? And words mean something different. And if you notice, language extinction and cultural extinction, it's the same exact slide, because the reality is you can't have a culture without language, and you can't have language without culture. Once one goes extinct, the other goes extinct. And if we're looking at how humans are going to adapt, well, again, we've already tried to do this, whether it be hashtags, whether it be books on the language of the universe, Klingon dictionary, or other types of squiggles. We have already tried to adapt and speciate in terms of making first contact. Doesn't mean that we're necessarily successful, but to our mind and to our intellect and to our imagination, we're at least able to move the ball up the hill a little bit at a time, where maybe if we do make contact, obviously they won't speak Klingon. If they do, then Gene Roddenberry was the coolest ever. But the reality is that we are mentally prepared. And let's hope a lot of these people who are the scientists who will make that first contact, probably not the anthropologist, not the artist. Let's hope it's not the politicians who will make that first contact, which will hopefully mean something greater than what we know now. And when we talk about biological adaptation, of course, I'm an anthropologist. We're talking about when a species changes over time, right? We could see that in our own species. We could see that in whales, which were actually land mammals. They changed over time and developed the same locomotion as fish, which is called a form of convergent evolution, where species from different groups do the same thing, like bats, birds, and flies. They all fly, but they're all part of the same different genuses and species. Biological speciation, of course, is where groups split off from each other. Our common ancestor being Homo erectus, we were probably Neanderthals might have been also connected to Homo erectus. So there's that speciation where a root ancestor gives rise to other species. And then, of course, extinction is extinction. And we know that Neanderthals are extinct, and so are all the other species of hominid that came before us are extinct. We are the last hominid standing, if you will. But we see extinction events happening all the time. There was, of course, the mass extinction event 65 million years ago. There have been 5 of those mass extinction events. There are extinction events called background extinction happening all the time, regional extinctions, and so on and so forth. There's different types of extinctions. And when we talk about biomass and contact, we have to remember that as humans, we are not economically so, but as a species, part of the 1%. 99% of the species that have existed on this planet, of which there were about 5 billion species, are gone. We know from our own science that there are about 8.5 million species on the planet is what we estimate, yet we've only classified 1.3 million species of that, which means that there's a huge gap. And if we put that into the context of biomass and the Drake equation, why I'm hopeful that it's not just a few species or of extraterrestrial out there, but lots of them out there. Because if we can only figure out 1.3 million of the classified species that exist right now, and there might be 8 million of them, well, that's an awful lot that we don't know. And that might be the same when we come back to the Drake equation and we say, well, yeah, there are extraterrestrials out there, and that's a lot more that we don't know. And interspecies biology. If you're a fan of the movie Galaxy Quest, you'll know this screenshot very, very well. Stuart, I see you smiling. I, of course, am a huge fan of Planet of the Apes. In fact, if it wasn't for Planet of the Apes, I would not be an anthropologist. My father did a really bad thing in 1968. He took a very impressionable David Orenstein, who was 6 at the time, to see the movie, and it changed my life. So, here's the issue of interspecies biology being played in our fiction. But you hear all the time about stuff like this, where they're puckering to get to your butthole or something like that, and you don't want to wake up on a flying saucer with these 4 guys sitting around you with their fingers extended, because it's probably not going to work out well for you. Let me see what time is it here? Oh, I've been going for a while. Okay, so what does all this change mean? Who benefits if we do make this human contact? Well, I believe, or I should say I conclude, that there are certain classes of people that will survive contact, whether it be radio signals or somebody landing on your front lawn, as long as they're not here to destroy us. I think it's going to be people who are not afraid of contact. If you can put yourself in this on a scale of 1 to 5, and if you are afraid of, if you fear contact, right? Let's say you're a 1, then you're going to have the war of the worlds moment. But if you're a 5, you're going to be easier with it. Same thing if you're a 1, if you fear change. Same thing if you fear difference. Same thing if you fear learning. The closer you are to 5 on the scale, the more apt you are to be open to this. And maybe that's why you're here today even. If you understand and accept science and the principles of science, if you understand that there's a larger material picture, and going back to some of my original slides, where I talk about the idea that science really can only deal with the material, with the measurable, with the peer review. If you're within that construct, rather than a construct of philosophy or theology, you might be better off and better served by seeing that, not being as afraid of that contact. And then, of course, if you're an activist, right, contribution means action. That means that you're going to do something in your life, whether directly with whoever's come or directly within human culture, to smooth things for the future, because you see yourself as a link in a chain. And if you're not threatened, and if those who come are not threatening, then the contribution you make is in equal proportion to how much time and attention you give it. So here are my final thoughts. I conclude that contact is inevitable. I don't think it is irrational to suspect or to conclude that we are not going to, at some point, either through low-end contact through radio signals or high-end contact, meaning physical contact, be in communication with and physically meet extraterrestrials one day. NASA believes it. At this point, though, no one really can say for certain if it's going to happen tomorrow or in 1,000 years. Or if it's happened, no one has come out and said that it has. It's probably the reason why it may not have happened, because, and it could have, right? But the point is that, keeping a secret like this under wraps would seem almost intolerable, because I don't know how we could keep this under such tight secret if it's already happened, although it could be possible that it has. We know that our own government, and therefore other governments around the world, are actively investigating this, whether it be SETI, right, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or METI, which is to message. SETI is just listening, right? But METI is sending out messages and saying, hey, could you guys hear us? And could you send something back? Right? So there's SETI, there's METI, and a whole host of other government organizations that are involved, and academics that are involved in this search right now. I have a colleague in Canada, I'm trying to remember her name, Catherine Denning, who's a wonderful speaker who's worked for both SETI and METI for many years. And I've just reached out to her for the first time, because I think she's a fascinating speaker on this topic as well. And as Carl Sagan would like to always said, that it would be a real waste of space if all of this space in the universe, forget about just even the galaxy, but the universe, if it was empty and we were it, that's sort of sad and depressing as far as I'm concerned, especially since the likelihood that that being true is false. That is, the likelihood that there are other species out there who are spacefaring and have an extraterrestrial intelligence and might be able to make contact are out there. So I'll leave you with this. Let me see if I can get this to work. Oh, no, I can't. I wanted to play the end of the music, but there it is for Carl. If you've seen the movie Contact, you know what this is. And I'll take your questions and comments and concerns, and hope you enjoyed the presentation. And I thank you for your time and attention.
Well, thank you very much, David. And if those of you who would like, if you could just unshare at this point, it will help me see people's questions. Although
Oh,
people
sure.
might want to take in that Sally Ride quote. Very nice. You might want to.
Oh, I
You can
put
read that
back
if you want for us.
Okay, let me see if I can find it. Hold on one second.
So if those of you who want to ask a question right now, please just use your hand raising tool so that not too many people don't come out of mute at the same time.
So I have that quote for you if you'd like.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, this is from Sally Ride. The view of Earth is absolutely spectacular, and the feeling of looking back and seeing your planet as a planet is just an amazing feeling. It's a totally different perspective, and it makes you appreciate actually how fragile our existence is.
Great. We have a question from Stephen Cowell.
Yes, hi. I put something in the chat as well about, I guess my feeling is, look, this is fascinating. You know, I love the universe, but I worry that this species is destroying itself with climate change. If we don't come together to figure out how to work together to deal with that, beings coming from other planets is a moot point, because I worry that in 50 years, 50 to 75 years, if we don't fix it, we won't survive. That takes, for me, the highest priority of reaching out and getting all people to be together, work together, and address a common problem. So anyway, that's my, I don't know if it's a question or just a
you're not wrong. I mean, if you look at how much CO2 we've put in the atmosphere, since industrialization, there's a connection between, what humans have done to the planet, up in starting about 12,000 years ago, when the planet didn't stop ruling us and we began to rule the planet. And if you're a climate science denier, and you don't want to say, oh, it's human causing this, you can't look at the data and not see the changes and say, okay, if you take the human element out, these things are still happening. And, there is hope. You might remember, as I remember, we banned CFCs when we had a hole in the ozone. And we said, okay, you know what? No more sprays. You can't do that anymore because it's putting a hole in the ozone. And, it's destroying the atmosphere, and we're letting in all these extra rays of the sun. We banned those commercially, we banned those governmentally. The hole healed itself and we moved on. You're right. We need to really pay attention to what we're doing now, because we are the masters of our own fate in that way. And extinction is real. If it's not the takers coming from another planet doing it, it's us as the takers who are doing it. And so, yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Thanks. A number of other people during the chat were also commenting about that problem. And I can certainly say that a lot of science fiction writers, I'm thinking notably of Arthur C. Clarke, have talked about how alien civilizations would wait to see if we managed not to destroy ourselves, if we were intelligent enough to technically create the kinds of civilizations that are so destructive, from nuclear weapons to earth-changing, climate-changing technologies.
Those are the anthropologists.
Yep.
They're waiting to see if whether we heal ourselves before they make contact, Yeah.
Some other questions, perhaps? Comments?
But how glorious would it be if we got to that point? Even if we still didn't make contact with extraterrestrials, the fact that we could heal the planet and also heal ourselves at the same time as a species would be wonderfully liberating, wouldn't it? It would have such an impact on how we view ourselves, how we view each other. I think, issues related to stratification and, all the things that we've been doing for 12,000 years, we're such an imitative species. We've been doing the same thing with slightly more complexity for the last 12,000 years. When it comes, once we created city-states, someone became the priest, someone became the politician, someone became the blacksmith, yada, yada, yada. We can get past that. We're still in our infancy, and even what we create as what we call civilization, is only 12,000 years old.
I have a question.
Go
Sure,
ahead.
Manuel.
David, I have a question that has to do you could say the human nature, culture, systemic relationship.
Mhm.
A lot of people in the social sciences tend to ignore, want to ignore, you could say our human natures, our biology,
Mhm.
and then there's the part about, well, we don't have a human nature. It's all up to the culture. So I wonder if you could address that, because I agree with E.O. Wilson,
Mhm.
where he says we do have a human nature, and it
Mhm.
happens to be both capable of good and evil,
Mhm.
and depends on our desire and our culture, we can go become a good species or a bad species. And
Mhm.
Harari, Noah Harari says the same thing in his book, Sapiens. So
Mhm.
I wonder if you could comment on how we make this bridge between biology, human natures, and culture to create a better society.
I wish I had the ultimate answer, and you've talked about two people who are really have thought about this much more academically than I have. I always tend to have this more of an emotive or emotional response to this, which is very Sagan-esque in my own opinion,
Okay.
is that we can, if we and because we know this, right? If we dial down the social pressure on things like giving people healthcare, giving people food, giving people medicine, giving people an education.
Yes.
And there are cultures, right, even on this planet that have done that. They're more homogeneous than, let's say, American culture, but they have. But their people are happier, they're more peaceful, they live longer, they have lower infant mortality, they have higher net education, simply because we've dialed down some of the things that are found in capitalism, which say everybody, you're on your own, F it. And it's it's competition, and that creates a whole bunch of stress that creates us them, both in terms of tribalism, right,
Right.
and issues related to seeing people as the other, right? That if it's in our human nature to be vicious to each other, certainly with colonialism, we've seen how vicious we can be with each other.
Yes.
We can also see in equal parts how we can also be rather helpful and wonderful with each other. And I think that science helps lead to those conclusions, because once you have the data, and the information is out there. If you read Steven Pinker, you know, if you read these social scientists, Phil Zuckerman, Society Without God. The less religious and more holistic a society is, the less stressful it is, and things are just better. So yeah, we tend to be a real schizophrenic species.
Yes,
Where
thank you.
we
Thank
we
you,
can
David.
at that same point have this angel on our shoulder, as well as this, you know, but the devil tends to come out in times of famine, right? It comes out in terms of competition. It comes out in those things that, you know, where you have to have a win-lose situation. What if we create situations where it's not win-lose anymore, but it's win-win? Well, then the devil gets smaller and the angel gets bigger.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that, David.
Sure.
Appreciate that very much.
And it's cultural. It's a cultural contrivance. Maybe it plays on aspects of our biology. You know, I'm not as much of a biologist to know, you know, when people say, oh, well, do you believe in nature or nurture? I'm saying, well, they both play a role, you know.
Yes.
But I think, you know, we come into this world pre-wired for breathing, sucking, and language.
Yes.
You know, of course, there's always the Mozart and the Einstein out there and stuff like that. But for the most of us, those are the three things that every primate has. Okay. And that what changes that, what grows you into the cultural artifact that you are the things in your family life, in your community, in your nation state, which creates the culture around you.
So we need to design, you could say, more humane, ethical, sustainable cultures.
Oh,
that's what
absolutely.
I would. Okay,
You know,
I mean, thank
yes.
you.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure.
We're getting a lot of thumbs up from people when your last
Great.
Thank you so much,
comments.
guys.
Thanks. Any other questions? Comments?
I'm available for bar mitzvahs, christenings. Yeah.
I would like to comment that I think the one thing that we don't talk enough about in the world of speculating about first contact and alien species, besides just the extreme distances and the extreme time frames, so that even if the galaxy were constantly creating planets with hominids of our equal intelligence or even greater intelligence, or other types
Or
of creatures,
even
beings,
right.
gas
Yeah.
beings, whatever, even if that was happening all the time differences in 15 billion years could be such that we've only been here, as you said, 13,000 years, and we've only been able to communicate for 100. It's such a tiny, insignificant frame that, yes, there may be all over the place, but we'll never coincide in time. We seem to assume that everything is happening at the same time. But there may be, you know, some far away right now that are exactly where we are, but we'll never, it's just too far away. The time is impossible. But beyond that, my question is really about biology. You didn't really mention the pandemic effect of these contacts. You sort of implied it, you know, the destruction, but even if we find other life in the solar system, there's a chance that it's so alien to our life that there would be a conflict and we would be destroyed.
Oh,
so,
absolutely.
You know, if aliens came here and landed, they would have to have mastered a technology that would protect both them and us if they didn't want to just be a taker.
Right, exactly. If they're so self-aware that they can travel large distances, that they would have had to figure that out as well, to not only know our biology and what we are susceptible to, but what they could accidentally cause. You know, if you remember when Columbus came and all these Europeans came and they gave their blankets to the Indians, it wiped out 50 million people because of smallpox. You know, there was no there's no there was no immunity to things that had been in the European genome forever. And of course, natural selection being what it is, a virus loves new hosts. And as we see in the pandemic now, and as we saw 500 years ago in the genocide caused by the native peoples here in the American continents and the Central American and South American continents. Good point.
Great. Well, if
Stuart,
anyone,
one quick question.
Yes, go
if I
ahead.
may.
go ahead.
David, I just read in an issue of Lapham's magazine, which was all about time, the issue of time.
Mhm.
And given that you mentioned so much about time and distances today, I was surprised and puzzled by discovering that the solar system, not the Earth, the solar system
Mhm.
is moving at a speed of 500,000 miles per hour.
Mhm.
That's incredible to me.
Yeah.
This whole solar system is moving through space 500,000 miles per hour. I mean, so my question is,
Since
who's
the
gonna-
Big Bang.
yeah, since the Big Bang.
Since the Big Bang, but everything's moving together, so we don't feel it or know or feel. Yeah.
Exactly. So my question is, if there is a civilization in another solar system, and okay, I think you partially answered already my question, and they need to catch up to us to arrive here physically, that they got to have a fast ship.
They've got to be multidimensional, or they've got to use time. They have to have mastered waves and wormholes and things like that in order to get here.
Yeah, thank you.
Because again, if nature works the same way in our solar system as it would in the galaxy, assuming that it's the same in all the galaxies, then every species of spacefaring creature would have the same construct. Now, how they've evolved and adapted and manipulated. Look, we created fire from nothing. We've we've invented an awful lot of things just in our own time here. So to say that a creature can invent something to manipulate space-time is a lack of our own imagination.
Thank you so much, David. Are you
Sure.
going to share this presentation with us, Stuart?
Yes.
It's up to you, but it would be
Yes,
great.
yes.
you could share it.
If David is willing, we will be presenting this presentation on our YouTube channel, which does exist already, and I will be advertising it shortly. Thanks, Andy, for some of your advice on that.
All right.
And
Thank you so much.
so we will definitely continue this conversation there. And with David, we look forward to hearing more from you as you
Thank you.
share your thoughts on all of this, and working with you also as another humanist leader. David is the new president of the Humanist Society of New York.
Yeah,
Correct.
New York.
Yes. So thank you very much. And please tune in bostonhumanist.org to find out our upcoming activities, and have a great Carl Sagan Day and November.
Beautiful.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Stay in
Thanks again,
touch.
David.
Find me on the internet. Find me on Facebook. We'll continue the conversation. I'm a public person. I'm happy to continue the chatting.
Peace out.
It's